Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle, here with Ari, and happy to be here with you all. I've been thinking about this topic. Layla, maybe try exiting the Zoom room and come back in. Sometimes that works, or restarting your computer. Of radical self-reliance. Relative to the recent conjunction that we had of Venus and Uranus in Taurus. And a part of what I'm in this exploration of what does it mean to actually be self-reliant? You know, I'm in the last trimester, the third trimester with we're having a baby number 3 for me, and this being right now has everything it needs, and it's coming through my being, and then, you know, it's going to enter the world, and we all know that on some level we have dependence on others. We have needs. We have things that are required that are outside of us, you know, that whether it's having a job to pay the bills, or food, or relationships in order to get what we believe is external needs met by another. But the way I've been approaching this idea of radical self-reliance is with this capital S, self. That on some level, from an evolutionary perspective, the soul comes here complete unto itself. And so there is a journey of the soul, because we're all one soul. We're all sharing in that journey. There is an element of the soul that is completely whole unto itself. And I think a part of our process of remembering ourselves, of really coming to know the true essence of ourselves, is remembering that wholeness. You know, wherever we feel a sense of lacking or not belonging, longing actually is a word that is within the word belonging, to be of the longing. On some level, there's a desire to return to source. There's a desire to be one with another, to unite, to feel connection, to feel that love. And yet the feelings themselves are all generated from the inside. And when we have not received that care, that connection early on, it can seem as though it's something we're constantly seeking through another. It's like a gaping wound or a repair in that thread of connection to the universe, to the soul. And in shamanic work, they have this thing called a soul retrieval, which is essentially a process of going through time, non-linear time and space, but like to the other dimensions, and bringing back parts of our souls. It's really reclaiming a sense of wholeness in oneself. And this is the piece that I feel the invitation with this Venus-Uranus, as Venus is going to move towards the North Node. That we have a return towards a sense of self that comes from a known wholeness, a known state of completion within the self. And it's contrary to what the world would want us to believe, because, essentially everyone comes through the same way, where the two become one, right? Your parents in some way, shape, or form came together in order to create you one. And you're born whole and complete as you are, a single human soul walking the earth with life experience that only you will ever know. There's an intimacy within yourself that only you will ever know. There are thoughts, there are experiences, there are ways of perceiving the world. This is why the birth chart is also so unique to the soul, and also not unique, because it encompasses the whole. Because we're all experiencing this unique soul experience throughout the journey, we can be told the lie that there is something that is missing, something that is going to complete us, something that is, or we might even feel we weren't given something, we didn't receive something that was very core to what the soul is calling forward. And I was reading Jeffrey Wolf Green, the Pluto book 2 this week, and he was talking about Venus in Taurus and relating like this need for ground and the need for self-reliance, and how I am beginning to distinguish the difference between self-reliance and self-isolation, you know, where the tendency to feel like, oh, I have to do this all myself. I need to be alone. I have to withdraw from the world in order to know myself, versus being able to rely upon a self with a capital S from the inside. And that, I think, is a practice of cultivation. It's something that we have to, every time the message of lack or the feeling of aloneness or the feeling of not complete within ourselves arises as some sort of story, early imprinting, feeling of neglect or lacking care and nourishment, there's something about returning inside where we actually can touch into, okay, in the same way I did the body scan just now, you know, feet connected, body connected, heart beating, breath moving, you know, mind resting. All of this is happening within this soul. And there's nothing else that needs to be, nothing else that has to come in, nothing else that has to be done. That's the gift of the present moment, because instead of our mind telling us, well, there is something that has to be done. I have this to accomplish, or I have these things that I need, or this is lacking in my life. There's an invitation to return to a state of well-being, a state of resting within one's being that acknowledges, like, I'm completely whole. I'm completely within this care of the self that created me, right? And we were all created in a way to have everything we need, the intelligence. All of this is happening, meanwhile, with Pallas Athene moving towards the North Node. And in the ancient mythology, she was Jupiter's daughter, but she was born of the mind of Jupiter. She wasn't born necessarily through the traditional means. And I always think of that as reflecting that she has this quality of an inherent and natural intelligence, wisdom that's cultivated, that just comes to us. And so we have the archetypal feminine and the wisdom of the masculine's daughter, right? Like the wisdom of truth, natural law coming through and really pointing us to what we already know. And that's the path of remembering. That's the soul's path. It's like forgetting everything that has been taught to us over time, forgetting all the stories that we have repeated over time, and instead grounding in the reality of what's here now, what's true now, what's always going to be true. And that wisdom then becomes an internal voice that actually creates an immense amount of safety, creates an immense amount of ground that we can live inside of and explore things. Because with all of this, we're being invited to shed all past stories, all the layers, all the ways in which other people, things outside of us, are lacking or missing or needed or wanted. And it's not to say that those things are wrong or bad. Actually, we might really desire partnership. We might really desire connection. We might really want to be touched by another or held, right? But if we aren't able to really embrace the wholeness of ourselves and offer that as a gift from the inside, we won't ever recognize its presence on the outside. And so there's a deeper healing that's being called here, because the will, the capital S will, the self will, always wants us to know ourselves as totally complete, as completely there in the present moment and with everything we need to evolve. And that's the second piece of remembering, is that we have everything we need to evolve. And all the external circumstances, the environments, the, the perceptions that we face within ourselves are food, for an evolving soul. They're nourishment for an evolving soul. And yet we can have gotten into a state of being where that nourishment has become toxic, or, has become strained. Maybe like we're just barely getting a little bit, just getting by. And there's really a feeling of like something has to shift here. And that's the radical nature of change. That's the nature of things being shooken up through our choice to willingly break open all the stories that we've been told about, how it's supposed to be, how it's going to be, what it's, what life is, right? There's people are always referring to the American dream, and how many lives have been built on the American dream. And if we really, break it down, it's not so much a dream as much as it is a nightmare. And there is actually something emerging, I think, within the state of consciousness that desires to grow what Charles Eisenstein calls a more beautiful world. And I think that world emerges through our knowing our own wholeness, through our knowing ourselves as connected to the whole. And when we know that, when we know interdependence instead of codependence, when we know independence, meaning that sovereignty that lies within, where our devotion to our soul, to our soul's work, to being the love that we are, actually becomes our daily practice, then little by little, all the things that would prevent us from feeling that sense of connection that we all long for start to fade away. And there starts to be a ground from within where listening and movement happen in the present moment. And it's deeply healing. It's deeply healing to all the narratives that say that there is something else outside of us, that there is somewhere else we need to be, that there is like something missing inherently, something not enough, not good enough. And that, I think, is the calling of these particular times. So I just feel like the invitation for in this practice is an embodied practice. It's a continuous checking in with our thoughts, with our physical well-being, with our own self-care, with our own connection to self. It's a willingness to really go in and deconstruct all the ways we've been thinking differently about ourselves, and start to question those things with a lot of care, with a lot of nourishment. Like, oh, okay, these were stories. They belong to somebody else. And if you listen to a story long enough, eventually it seems as though it's true, whether it is or not. Eventually it seems as though it's yours, whether it is or not, because the narrative becomes so familiar. And there is a part of this particular time, Mercury's at the very last degrees of Taurus, where it's like there's a shift coming into a newer mindset. But in order for us to stabilize new thoughts, we actually have to have a ground where we can practice with those thoughts. My daily spiritual practice is the Course in Miracles, and it's a lesson a day of practicing very particular thoughts in a very particular way every day with an instruction. And a part of why that has been so powerful for me is because The loving thought, the forgiven thought is not the natural thought of this world. It's not. It is condoned upon, supported, and even, idealized in some ways to be resentful, to be angry, to be disgruntled towards the world. And yet that doesn't create a more loving, more beautiful world. It creates a more disgruntled, angry world. And so it actually takes consistent training when you've been raised in a particular story, where you've been fed, if you had a parent at a very young age who repeated the same thing. Oh, you're so slow. You're so slow. Why are you so slow? And all of a sudden it's like, whether or not you were ever slow, whether or not there was anything wrong with your pace of life, the message had been imprinted by a particular time in life where that stays with you. And it takes a radical approach to deconstructing that message to actually recognize, no, my pace is perfect. My pace is perfect. It may be different. I may not function in the ways that others do, but I'm a whole soul. So I came here with everything I needed to be and to evolve and to become the self that I've always been meant to be. And for a number of years, I lived with the question, who am I becoming that I've already become? And it was such a powerful inquiry. Who am I becoming that I've already become? Because to think that we have to do something to become like a better person, or, change something about ourselves or fix something about ourselves is really it's not a right orientation. But that there's already inherently built within me a deeply loving, deeply connected, deeply grounded person who is a part of creating a field of love and forgiveness and trust. And I may not be so in touch with the thoughts that remind me who she is. I may have still old stories moving me towards an orientation or a perception of my life that isn't accurate to what actually is. And this is where the present moment can be so deeply healing, when we can see like, oh, I actually have everything I need right now. And I remember I worked in finance for many years, and the belief that we don't have something that we need is a really strong one. It's a strong motivation to continue to earn money. It's a strong motivation to save money or hoard things or hold on. It's like all these different components of our life and capitalism are built around this idea that we don't have what we need and that we somehow need to do things in order to get what we need. And when I heard this quote from someone that just basically said, to believe that you don't have what you need in the present moment is insanity. And I had to really look at that. It was like, wow, that's a strong statement right there. It's like, but in this present moment, do you have everything you need? Are you breathing? Are you sitting in a chair? Are you support? Yes, there might be different changes and different resources and different things that will need to come in at different times. And certainly, you might actually have needs that arise along the journey, right? Like you might not be hungry right now, but a need for food will arise naturally in the body, and then food, and it's like, and we're in relationship to what is, what's coming, what's happening as it unfolds, versus constantly staying in the fear or the state of belief that we need something outside of us, that something is missing, that something is lacking, and thus us ultimately we're not enough. And so I just feel like there's a radical reorientation happening in all consciousness in some way, shape, or form that would allow each and every one of us to be able to actually remember who we are as a part of the whole soul, and to trust ourselves, right? When we feel grounded, when we feel embodied, when we know our wholeness, there's a deep trust of the capital S self, on the inside. And that's a really important cultivation right there. Because again, if the voices that we've heard for so long have been doubtful, or if, from a Pluto Saturn sort of power dynamic situation, if we've always had an external authority outside of us giving us direction, then when we lack that direction within, it will feel incredibly destabilizing. It's scary. It's like the ability to rest in the unknown is part of the greater calling here, because when the world wants to change, when consciousness wants to change at the level that it does right now, there ultimately everything within our current awareness has to change on some level. And that is either extremely destabilizing. You notice a lot of people, as they're having an awakening experience, will have a mental breakdown. And sometimes you'll hear spiritual teachers refer to those breakdown periods. Like, it seemed like I was having a nervous breakdown, but what was actually happening was I was having an awakening. And as that awakening is happening, there's a sense of perfect peace that actually arises within that experience. When I've experienced those moments of feeling totally awake, totally connected to all of life, there's a level of peace and ground that comes with that is just unshakable. And I've had the gift of being able to experience that a few times in my life and recognize, like, oh, okay, that's not my natural state of my pattern of thought, but that's why we do the daily work with the thoughts, with our practice, with our embodiment, to actually return to that state again and again. Because in that state, there is a total remembrance that everything I need is right here. Everything I am is complete as it is. The intelligence of whatever is becoming through me as a part of my soul journey is present now. And so I can't be lacking in anything, even if I am following a calling, even if there are longings and desires. It's a matter of like remembering that those guides, those movements are only continuing to bring us back to the whole soul. So that feels like a good place, to stop talking, and maybe stop the recording and see.
Purpose of your life is this moment. Live your life. The purpose of your life is to live it. Live your life. Every frown and every smile, all the feels and all the while, you are holy. Perfect peace and perfect grace, love finds you in this place where you are. The purpose of your song is to sing it. Sing your song. The purpose of your song is to live it. Sing your song. In your pain and in your grief, there's nothing that you need to keep. Give it all to the one that holds it all, will hold you as you fall, sweetly undone. life is this moment. Live